Congratulations! You are in the right place at the right time. This is the Summon Courage, Change Everything podcast with Matthew Levy, an inspiring interview with a guest who has achieved big goals in life and work and who will divulge their secrets to success. Today, now, the man behind the microphone, Matt Levy.
Hello, Summon Courage, Change Everything community. I'm Matthew Levy, the host of the Summon Courage, Change Everything podcast. If you like what you hear, please help spread the word in your networks and with a 5-star review or the equivalent. I'm so pleased to have Paul Curci joining us for this episode. Paul works at the intersection of strategy and human development, as well as organizational change. Paul looks at business performance through the lens of communication, leadership, and strategic alignment. Founded in 2008, the Curci Group is a coaching and consulting firm specializing in executive coaching, team effectiveness, meeting facilitation, and change management. Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's great to be with you.
Excellent, excellent. So, Paul, we're going to have some fun today talking about summoning courage to achieve big goals in work and life. And in prepping for the podcast, I know that you created some big change in your career several years ago when you transitioned from the publishing business to starting your own business. I'm sure that it isn't everyone's dream, but a lot of our listeners do think about being their own boss. Can we jump right into that?
Yeah, sure, Matt. I'm happy to kind of give you the backstory a little bit. I guess there are a couple of events that led up to that that may or may not make sense from a sequential standpoint, but there is a thread. So I started my career in the media business right after graduating art school. So it was there's kind of a bit of a shift there, you know, having a degree in painting and working as a fine artist for 10 years. I showed my work in Philadelphia, New York, and even in Europe, and at the same time was working at an alternative newspaper, and that was quite a shift. But I found myself doing sales and marketing, and did that for a period of time, and eventually kind of took over the department. Eventually became publisher of that newspaper, and I worked there for about 15 years. As I was approaching the end of that tenure, I was beginning to see the handwriting on the wall for traditional mainstream media, of which we were a part. And, went down several roads to see whether I could contribute to changing the dynamics for newspapers. And when I realized I wasn't going to be the guy that solved it, I hired my own coach. And I began working with a coach to help me transition and craft a new chapter for my professional life. And it was during that experience that I came to the realization that what I really loved doing was exactly what my coach was doing, and that was helping individuals get from point A to point B. I was actually also facilitating a group of leaders throughout the city in what I refer to as a mind share group. So we would convene on a monthly or every 6 weeks or so. And the concept of mind share was a group of people who volunteered their time, talent, and resources in service to one another's personal and professional goals. So we were really a support group of people from every area of business. And, I convened that group. Through that experience, word got out that I was a convener and facilitator, and Drexel University reached out, was looking for a facilitator to help them merge two of their schools, or help them facilitate a process that would bring together the leadership of two schools and help them merge into one. And I was able to engage with them on that project, and on the basis of that experience, I turned in my resignation as publisher and gradually transitioned full time. And I think the common thread through the whole experience was this interest in communication. Visual communication as a fine artist, communicating with advertisers and readers as a publisher, and helping people today with their communication efforts, which are often kind of at the root of some of the developmental issues we see in organizations.
So you mentioned hiring a coach. Now, I don't know if a lot of people go in that direction. Obviously, I do it. I think it's great. Had a coach, love the idea. I guess the question is then, how did you come to the realization that that would be a good move for you?
Matt, I'd like to take all the credit for being that proactive and that prescient at the time, but the reality is that the universe has a way of providing what we need. And at that time, it was through a conversation with someone at a party who happened to be an executive coach that it became clear that the two of us could and should work together. So it in a sense, it found me.
Mm-hmm.
I was, he was explaining what coaching was all about, and I was standing there realizing that this is exactly what I need. So I was very fortunate.
You were open to it. A lot of people feel like they can read it in a book. Now, what I like to say about that, Paul, is that if it was as simple as reading in a book, we'd all be billionaires and we would all look like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, right?
Right.
It's not that easy.
No, there's some things you can't learn in a book.
Yeah. So the podcast, one of the podcast's main themes is around courage and being able to look into a situation, face fear, face limiting beliefs, self-doubt. You must have had to do that to go in the direction of the Curci Group, which, has your name on it, right? So talk to us a little bit more about, your thoughts about doing this, and did you suffer from the common limiting beliefs and self-doubt that you could really make this happen?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is no, there's no doubt. When I decided to take the leap, which took some time, but when I decided to take the leap, I did so with kind of a mixture of fear and bravado. So I felt like I did have some innate ability and skill, and I was very open to learning. So I was very engaged in the coaching program and in continuing to learn about facilitation and organizational development and all of those things. And I felt confident that I could actually get good at this. What I didn't know was whether anyone would care if I was good. And I didn't know what the competitive landscape would be. And I didn't know if anyone would hire me. My approach really was to reach out to my network of people and share my story, share my intentions. I didn't have a lot of case studies to work with at the time. Mm-hmm. So I had to, rely on people who maybe knew and trusted me enough to work with. Mm-hmm. And I came across a couple of early opportunities with some Fortune 500 companies through some people who had, the confidence in me to put my name forward. And those experiences, first of all, not only taught me a great deal, but they really threw me into the deep end. Mm-hmm. And I found that I really relished being in the deep end because it really accelerated my learning. So I was very committed to overperforming during these engagements. Mm-hmm. So I had some early opportunities with large companies, a large utility company who had just gone through a merger. They merged with their largest competitor. And they hire the Boston Consulting Group to come in and do the big change management, but they hired me to integrate the two IT departments. And this was at its root, it was very much an internal communications engagement. And I was fortunate enough through some new colleagues of mine to have been able to learn about and use an internal communications maturity model that was designed for IT departments. And through that process, we were able to identify probably about 24 different areas where they can improve their communications before they can become a fully integrated and blended IT department. Mm-hmm. And that was a wonderful experience. I learned a ton. I had wonderful relationships with that company. They're among my biggest champions today. And that kind of paved the way to other interesting engagements. Mm-hmm. So that gave me a bit of a boost early on.
Excellent. So you do a lot of coaching of CEOs. Do you see this concept of facing fears and limiting beliefs and self-doubt? Do you find that with the clients that you work with, that they face that too?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think, in a very real way, we all experience the same types of fears and insecurities, regardless of what level of achievement what level we've accomplished. And it's the saying that it's lonely at the top is really true. Mm-hmm. And there are not a lot of places where people in the C-suite can go and really challenge themselves to perform at a higher level, to address some of their flat sides, to overcome some of the obstacles that are interfering with their ability to lead. There's sufficient fear and self-doubt combined with in some instances, healthy egos and
sure.
and fierce determination. Most of these people have gotten to the level that they're at in large part because of their fierce determination to succeed.
Excellent. So, Paul, the listeners are used to hearing me talk about what I call the dream action plan. And this is this 5 steps that help individuals achieve big goals. And the D is around devotion. And we talk about how if you can connect what you're doing in your life and in your work to something bigger than yourself, it really helps with this concept of our search for meaning. And look, at different phases in our careers, this is more important than at other phases. But for you, Paul, have you been thinking? Have you thought about how what you're doing in the Curci Group connects to something bigger than yourself?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And, I mentioned earlier that I felt like I had an inkling that I might actually have some innate skills and capabilities in this area, but it really wasn't, an aha moment for me was a quote that I heard, and it was shared with me by my own coach, from Howard Thurman. And maybe you've come across this quote, but the quote is, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it." Mm-hmm. Because what the world needs is people who've come alive. Mm-hmm. And that really resonated with me because it really underscores the fact that our greatest source of power, our greatest impact comes when we discover what lights us up and then we decide to do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that quite gets at your question of devotion, but when I came to realize that this really wasn't about me, mm-hmm. It was about the impact that this work can have mm-hmm. On things at a global level. There's a ripple effect that comes with being able to to support somebody's development, an individual's development, a team's development, an organization's development. That ripple effect, it really extends quite far.
Mm-hmm. And you talked a little bit already, or alluded to your family. I think that can be certainly a huge source of inspiration, that when you're deciding whether to make a left at your 5 o'clock appointment and go home, or turn right and maybe make one more call, visit one more client. You know, you may be thinking of the kids and how you're trying to set them up for long-term success. That could be a huge motivator for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Tremendous source of joy and tremendous source of motivation.
Mm-hmm. Right. In more ways than one, huh?
Right.
Yeah. So we talk about the R is resolve, this unwavering determination, particularly as it relates to goal setting. I guess because the feeling is a lot of people have these great ideas, maybe in the shower or when they're driving, and a lot of times people just don't put these ideas into motion. What's your thoughts about goal setting and sticking to a plan to execute and make things happen in your life and in your career?
Hmm. Yeah, I talk about goals ad nauseum with clients, right? And my own goals are less codified, frankly. I think I alluded to early on, my strategy was to go out and talk to as many people as possible and to tell them my story and about my intentions. And my goals really are around ensuring that I have, much like an investor, right, has a diversified portfolio of various size clients and companies that I can work with, and making sure that I have some blue chip large companies that I can rely on for steady work. That's if I have to think in terms of business goals, those are things that I keep top of mind. Currently, my focus really is serving the middle market companies, and by that I mean companies that are between 20 million and 1 billion in revenues, because I feel like I can offer them more, and as a group we can offer them a wider range of services and support that they may not have the resources for internally. So I don't know whether that speaks to strategy or to goals, but those are the things that I keep top of mind as I pursue work.
Mm-hmm. In a speech I give, I talk about how Rockefeller knocked on doors all day, every day for an entire summer when he was 16 years old, looking for his first job. And I use that as an example of this resolve, this unwavering commitment to getting something done and like not being denied. Can you think of an example in your career or life broader?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you just were so committed, you were just not going to take no for an answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that I think is the best piece of advice that I've gotten, and that's to never ever give up, and that success often lies on the other side of failure,
Mm-hmm.
or the instinct to give up. My resolve is really, and in part it's you can define this as a business development strategy of sorts, but I am very committed to finding ways to help people every day.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's clients, prospects, friends, connecting people, doing those little things that Adam Grant, frankly, talks about in Give and Take, are really central to my approach.
Um, so And we could go down the networking and give and take path like crazy, because I'm a huge fan of that. But I want to press on to some other topics. We talk about E, which stands for energy. And the concept there, of course, is that people have a finite amount of energy as human beings, and we have to use it to the best of our ability. I talk about the people, places, and things that give us energy, and the people, places, and things that sap us or zap us of energy. What are some of the people, places, and things that you concentrate on to try to give you energy to be at your best, Paul?
Yeah, yeah. I may have alluded to my family as a tremendous source of energy. No matter how bad your day is when you come home, and poor young, and my children are quite young, and they they run and hug you. It's everything melts away. And starting the day that way is equally as exciting. So my family in general are a tremendous source of energy for me and inspiration. Activities that I engage with. I mean, I've practiced yoga for many years. It just sort of helps keep you flexible physically, emotionally, and spiritually. We used to travel extensively, my wife and I, and that was before the kids came, but we still managed to get away, a handful of times a year, and that is very invigorating for us. And we have a place at the beach that we go to on weekends that has just been an enormous source of joy and contentment for us as a family, and really does recharge me. The little things, playing with the kids, going fishing, playing at the beach, cooking outside, is all of that stuff has been a real blessing. And of course, friends and family and neighbors, we still have lots of close relationships with good friends, and that's also a source of energy.
How do you make time for that, though? Because it's the Curci Group. You're the CEO of this coaching and consulting firm, and clients are needing you. You got a prospect. There's bills to be paid, right? I could go on and on now that I have a sense of it myself. How do you make the time for the family time, the exercise that you're talking about, getting away? How do you fit that in?
There's a lot you say no to, Matt, as you probably well know. The life we lead today is very different than the one we led prior to the children and prior to running our own business. You find a time. You blend things. You make use of your time as best you could. You just make the time for the things that are important. I think that's what we all do. We make compromises in order to get things that we want out of life.
I heard it attributed to Covey, but I understand that it may have originated elsewhere. But the classic, putting rocks into a jar and then pebbles, sand, and water, and being able to pack a lot in if you do it in the right order, right? So the rocks for you've talked a little bit about, you're getting the big things in, and then you're working the rest of your life around them. Because if you did it the other way, put the sand and the pebbles in, and then you're left with these rocks, they're not going to fit in.
Exactly. That's the perfect analogy. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting. You talked a little bit about saying no. That's something that many of us need to practice more, because the distractions are everywhere. And when you say no, do you get concerned that you're lose a friend, tick somebody off? What's your process for saying no? How do you stay firm to that?
Yeah. Well, you do it through necessity mostly, because there are so many hours in the day. And it's easy to become distracted. As a as a former visual artist, I'm prone to distractions, but I realize that there's so little time, that you want to be judicious with the way you spend your time.
Yeah, so can we talk a little bit about the A in the dream framework, which is attitude, and certainly we know about the power of a positive attitude. There's the whole area of positive psychology that's coming forward. How does this concept play out in your day-to-day life, work, and with your clients?
Yeah. So attitude is so important, right? And I like to describe it more as a growth mindset. Borrowing from Carol Dweck's work and others who have talked about what you alluded to earlier, self-limiting beliefs, and that mindset, that growth mindset that that tells us we're capable of learning anything, that failure is not necessarily a setback, but an opportunity to learn something new. Those self-limiting beliefs that keep us back are, can be devastating and paralyzing for people.
Mm-hmm. So what would be a tip then for somebody that may fall naturally more on a pessimistic thinking scale, and they know that they need to be more optimistic and think more optimistically, and they struggle with that? Will you have a tip for them to try to overcome?
It's always a question from my perspective as a coach, of challenging their beliefs, their statements, challenging them. I mean, what evidence do they have to support this self-limiting belief? What if you were to look at it from this perspective? What would your best friend tell you about that situation, about your ability in that area? Just kind of get them to change their perspective on, what their beliefs are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use the example of a paradigm shift, and the classic paradigm shift is the older astronomers thought that the sun rotated around the Earth, and it wasn't until Copernicus, like 1,500 years later, that he proved that, of course, that the Earth is revolving around the sun. And that was a complete paradigm shift because everybody on the planet at the time couldn't believe it. And then they snapped in and said, oh, you know what? That's actually the way it is. So this paradigm shift thought, a metaphor, is about how we can also change the way we view things, and all of a sudden it opens up all new possibilities.
It's so true. All of our behaviors stem from our beliefs. And as soon as those beliefs are challenged and changed, our behaviors change along with them.
Yeah, it reminds me also of Frankl, who was the one that talked about that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And if, as human beings, we can only draw our awareness to the space and decide what to do in that space, it can change everything, because people think that when stuff happens to them, that they don't have a choice and that they have to react a certain way. A quick example of this is something like death, where in Western cultures, the knee-jerk reaction to death is grief. But in some Eastern cultures, when somebody dies, they immediately celebrate the life that the person has. Perfect example of stimulus death, response grief. Doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, that's terrific. I just wrote that down because I have to look up Frankl.
Yeah, that's Viktor Frankl, who was a concentration camp survivor during the Holocaust. He was also a neurologist and a psychiatrist. and his famous work was Man's Search for Meaning. And this component of between stimulus and response is a space, is something that I don't want to over portray it, but for me, it was a life changer, a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So mastery is the last letter in the dream framework. And as you know, Paul, mastery is around being a lifelong learner and continually trying to improve, one's skills. I know from knowing you that you practice this concept of lifelong learning, but give our listeners a few ideas about how you continue to sharpen your saw.
Wow, that's a great question. I try to do it in a variety of ways. There's always a book I'm in, I'm into. So there's learning from that. Currently, I referenced Carol Dweck's work recently. Her book called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success is one that I would recommend. I also was very impressed with Tracy Goss's book, The Last Word on Power, which I read recently, that further explores the importance of context and people's belief systems as a catalyst for their behaviors. I interact with colleagues who are in this industry. I'm part of a global coaching collective, and we meet online monthly in a kind of a discovery call, during which we evaluate cases and share perspectives and tools and techniques for serving our clients. I have a group of my own, which includes Mayor Rosenbaum, who is a terrific facilitator. She started out as a terrific facilitator and then decided to go even deeper with her knowledge. So now she's in the midst of this very intense course. So she's taking her facilitation levels to a whole new height. Ben Bowman, who is a young, very dedicated, very earnest coach and strategic alignment specialist, and Rod Sullivan, who is a leadership development and an executive coach, as well as an IT consultant. And these are people that I interact with regularly, and we share ideas and thoughts about this complex world of human development that we're very engaged in.
Yeah, sure. So interesting to reflect that 10 years ago, 2007, there was no iPad, no Airbnb, no Spotify, Instagram, Android, or Pinterest. Can you imagine? Could you have predicted in 2007 that this is what you would be doing now? And the second part of the question is, what do you think you might be doing in 2027?
Wow. Oh, that's a great question. The first part of your question, all I could have predicted back in 2007 was that I would be helping to facilitate change. So at the individual and organizational level, I feel much more grounded in the work I'm doing. I could not have predicted that I would have, for example, been a catalyst for transforming labor management relations I would not have predicted that I was doing any number of the things that I've had the privilege of having done over the past few years, whether it's working with biotech teams or facilitating planning meetings for a global food company. I could never have predicted any of that, but I said it before, the universe is strange. It kind of delivers what we focus on, we tend to get. In terms of what I'll be doing in 2027, you used the word mastery earlier, and I really want to become masterful at this work. I'll have had I'll have had lots of years under my belt by then. So no excuses. If I, continue to, what I'd love to be doing is really working more with, transformational leaders who really want to change the world. And I would love to be walking beside those folks, supporting their efforts. I do occasionally have that opportunity, and I'd like to be doing that exclusively by 2027.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, hey, you just put it out there to the universe, didn't you?
See what comes back.
What's the best advice you ever received?
I've got to go back to that statement I made earlier when someone told me just never give up and never give in. That if you have a mission, keep it front and center and find a way to keep it moving forward every day. And you know what? There are going to be days where you're not going to be at your best, and there are going to be days where you struggle and you lack focus and you lack energy, and you want to give up. And those are the times where you really want to dig in, believe in yourself, and push forward. Because as I stated earlier, success often lies just on the other side of failure. And if we can weather those periods, we build resilience and we get to another level.
Yeah. And, you're reflecting on your comments, Paul, that particularly in service businesses like ours, it can be easy to get distracted, like we talked about before. I was reading recently that somebody suggested that we in service businesses should think of our work in the same way that truck drivers think of their work. And what was meant by that is truck drivers don't say, hey, I don't feel like getting out of bed today and driving a truck. They have a route, they get in their truck and they drive. They show up and they do their work. This is what I've been thinking about is, I can't make any excuses. I can't give up. I have to get in the truck every day and drive.
Right. That's so true. I never really was absent much, but, I could probably count on one hand the number of days that I've, was absent for one reason or another. Since leaving and going out on my own, I don't know if I've ever missed a day of work. You just get up and grab the keys and drive the truck on a daily basis. I don't know what it is, but there's something, maybe it's just, you're driven to explore what's possible on a daily basis.
I think it's the devotion. Yeah. You're working every day, to support not just support yourself, but again, I guess I'm getting back to when your name's on the door. It's just a whole nother level of dedication.
Yeah,
for sure. So listen,
there's also that's too scared to fail thing too.
Yeah. Listen, as we wind down, is there anything else that you would love to share with our listeners?
Matt, we touched on a lot of themes that are really resonate with me, and the one that I guess I'd like to emphasize is there's this age-old debate as to whether or not people are capable of changing, and you hear that often, right? You hear there are a lot of truisms that aren't necessarily true, and often. You'll be assigned to work with someone who is even beyond middle age. And the question becomes, well, this person's been this way their whole life. What can they really change? And I think, I think science has put that question to bed. I think the overwhelming evidence is that people can change. But it has to start at the root core level, and that's with changing their beliefs or really deeply understanding their context, what it is that they believe to be true about themselves and about the world, and really probing on that. And once, people can kind of uproot some of those, those basic root beliefs, then they are capable of changing.
I love that, Paul. Thank you for that. Yeah, you're reminding me of the actual neuroscience behind change, brain chemistry, that through MRIs, they show that even into old age, we can continue to expand our thoughts, our brain. It's not static, and it doesn't dissipate. So there's definitely hope for all of us.
Plasticity, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Neuroplasticity. That was what I was looking for. Beautiful. So Paul, listen, how can our listeners reach out to you? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, you're welcome to hit me at paul@thecurcigroup.com and via email. And Curci is spelled Curci. Some people get that wrong. And or hit me up on Twitter at Citizen Curci. Mm-hmm. Or just go to my website, which actually launched a brand new one just today. And that's thecurcigroup.com.
Great. And I'm sure wherever people are listening to the podcast, we'll make sure that we have a link there for people to track you down.
Oh, terrific.
Awesome. Hey, Paul, thank you so much for those amazing insights. It was wonderful to have you. To our listeners, remember, please subscribe and share a positive review. That's how we get the word out about the podcast. This is Matthew Levy. And until our next episode, remember, when you summon courage, everything changes.